Hi, welcome to KXAN Plus. I'm your host, Esmeralda Zamora, and we have our Kristen's Classroom episode today with some special guests in the studio. We have Kristen, of course, Tommy, and we have our KXAN weather intern. Kristen, what's our weather intern's name? Trinity.
Trinity's on air.
So we have a full room today, and we have a fun topic. We're going to talk about the Olympics, right, Kristen?
Absolutely. So, everyone's been talking about the Olympics that we've got on NBC, on KXAN, but today we're going to be talking about sustainability at the Olympics, different ways that they're going green. A lot of focus on, obviously, the sports, the athletes, and the challenges. But Tommy, as you know, there's a lot of moving parts kind of behind the scenes when it comes to making sure these competitions can go in a changing climate.
Man, I'm learning something new every single time Olympics come up, whether it's a sport, and this is going to be great too, sustainability and our changing climate. I'm excited. Let's get into it.
Yeah, so the Olympics is held in a different location every single time they have the Olympics. This year is Italy, right?
Yes,
So
Milan Cortina for sure.
so they definitely have a different climate than we do here in Texas.
Yes, a little higher elevation, a little colder, and rightfully so for the Winter Olympics. So I wanted to kind of start with sustainability at this Winter Olympics. Then we'll talk a little bit more about what we saw sustainability at the Summer Olympics 2 years ago in Paris. We know that 21% of the vehicles being used over there fully electric, and 20,000 pieces of furniture out there have actually been reused from the Paris Olympics. Biofuel is being used for the snowcats and the temporary generators. 90% of the venues are existing or either temporary facilities too. And then, the IOC, who's in charge of making sure the Olympic Games are firing on all cylinders as they should, 80% or 86%, I should say, of the permanent venues are in use today of all the Winter Games past. So over 50 years of history there. Looking more recently in the 21st century, 94% in the 21st century of the Games venues are still being used. So I'll bring in Tommy now to kind of talk through some of these because we know the importance of electric vehicles, not only here, but we were talking a lot, Tommy, even this morning about snowmaking, snow guns, snowcats, and using more sustainable features and sustainable processes there.
Yeah, so making the snow, it sounds so much more complicated. It's just water, air, just easy to make. Of course, you have to deal with the temperature, staying below freezing, the certain temperature of the water. But like we talked about on the CW, the athletes, they just want snow, right? And so the snow that they make versus the snow that falls is similar enough to where they can get the job done. You have the trial runs, the preliminaries, the actual runs. They have to be able to cut and steer the bobsledding. And a lot of that, especially Beijing, they used so much of that artificial snow. And back in the States, our West Coast friends, with the lack of snowpack that they've been using, they've had to rely Sierra Nevadas, the Rockies, on a lot of that artificial snow this season.
Yeah, so you think about, snow guns, the machines that are used to make the snow. And when we say artificial snow, we are, like Tommy said, talking about actual snow, right? Just water droplets that are being fanned out into tiny little pieces that are cold enough to freeze by the time they fall. But snow cats, like I mentioned, that are being used in Milan right now, those are used for grooming the snow. So we know that those are using renewable and biofuels to be a little bit greener while they're out there not only making snow, but also making sure it is groomed. The venues, and I've talked a lot about this on here too. Tommy, we talked about, with the Rio Games, they build these big infrastructures, these big soccer stadiums that get used for 4 weeks, with the Olympics and the Paralympics, and then never touched again. But it seems like they're by the numbers at least really trying to take advantage of what's naturally there already.
Yeah, it's when you look at the Cortina landscape, it's hard for me to imagine building a permanent structure. There's so many valleys and slopes and for the economy, it makes more sense to have a pop-up, takedown, because you have, again, the tourists, the athletes, the Olympic Village. How often is the Olympic Village, if you're making these permanent homes, how often is that going to be reused? Probably not a lot.
Absolutely. And so it's encouraging to see that they're reusing furniture from games past. So speaking of which, let's move on to the Paris Olympics. So we know that, this was 2024 that we had the Summer Games. I thought this was very impressive. 100% renewable electricity used at the 2024 Paris Olympics. And we remember the river that they had all the swimming events in, and there was maybe a little bit of some discussion as to whether or not it was swimmable with the bacteria. Well, this Olympic Games kind of launched this huge effort to clean up and restore. I believe it's the Seine River. Am I?
Yeah, I can see that in the
so,
website,
yeah.
in our website.
Well, I because it looks like Seine, and I want to say that it's the Seine River. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've never been to Paris, sadly. So, do you know Trinity? It's the Seine River?
I thought it was Seine.
Oh, Seine. That's right.
Seine.
No, you're so right. It's the Seine River. Thank you.
Good
Thank
clarification.
It's spelled Seine, so it's a little tricky when you're reading it.
See, this is
Y'all
why
don't ask me to read that.
I know, right? And I remember having this discussion in my head 2 years ago when we were talking about it. But they invested $1.5 billion, I should say, in order to clean and restore that river. Also, the meals. So the meals provided for the Olympics and Paralympics, 13 million meals. Those used half the carbon emissions of an average meal being prepared in Paris at that time. They used loaned or even rented sports equipment for the Paris Games. And something that I thought was really cool that I remember talking about a couple years ago was the metal inside some of those medals was from the Eiffel Tower. When they renovated it, they actually preserved some of that metal.
That is so cool.
Isn't that neat? Put it inside the gold, the bronze, and the silver medals that the athletes were obviously earning. And what's more, going back into the sustainability, 95% of the venues used in the Paris Olympics were either already there or temporary, meaning they're not going to sit idle. So, Tommy, again, bringing you in here, this kind of was the gold standard with all the Olympics games we've had in the past to have so much of this. And you almost wonder, looking at winter sports versus summer sports, if it is easier to maybe use what's already there for the summer games than it is for the winter games.
Yeah, looking ahead, LA, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're using all sorts of different places around the country. I don't hear or see any sort of big construction that needs to be done in the States for this. So it seems like they're going to follow Paris's tracks, at least with the emissions and the recycling. And, you know, the meals thing was so surprising to me because these athletes, I mean, they probably
They're
eat
eating a lot.
like 6,000 calories a day. You know, they're getting chicken and rice and steak and veggies. So that was definitely an interesting stat.
For sure. Yeah, I think circling back, I do know they're using SoFi Stadium as one of the venues for the LA Games, which is where the Los Angeles Rams now play. And then the Coliseum, which was built for 1980s Olympics, where USC plays football. There's going to be some beach venues, obviously. I know they were initially thinking Venice Beach, and they're going to be moving that elsewhere now. But some good stuff looking forward to for the summer games.
Oh, it's going to be a blast.
Something that caught my eye in your article, jumping back to Paris, was that they launched the 1.5 billion effort to clean and restore that Seine River, and it had not been suitable for swimming for over 50 years before that.
Yeah.
So they made a big impact.
I remember them talking about it, of like worried about the athletes getting sick if they were ingesting some of that water.
Yeah.
So they really did have to go in and clean it and make sure not only was it swimmable, but swimmable to the fact that you're talking about some of the most in shape people in the world who are going to be in there, you know, doing what they can at full exertion. So I do remember that being a big discussion, and obviously they pulled it off because that's exactly where they held. It wasn't even just the competitions. I remember them doing the opening ceremonies along the river too. You remember that?
Yes, I do. Didn't they have like a boat parade before?
Yes.
Yes. And interesting enough with the Italy thing, I think there was a couple different spots where they did the opening ceremonies, but what's interesting about this year's Winter Games is it's over a large chunk of Italy. I think I put it in my article how many miles across and how many athletes. I'm not going to remember off the top of my head there.
3,000 athletes compete in over 100 events of 16 sports at 25 venues stretched over 250 miles across northern Italy.
Cortina, Milan, right? Different
towns, yeah.
Climates,
different
intense,
areas,
right? I think the elevation too is pretty different.
And they're competing indoor and outdoor, right?
Yes, I want to say I was watching the other night, and the luge, I believe, is inside, which makes sense in theory, right? Because you want those ice walls to stay frozen.
Yes.
But even the
that was yesterday, right? They were competing with that yesterday?
I forget. I mean, there's so many different competitions.
Yeah.
We did a really cool story that is forever going to stick with me, I feel. One of the ice rinks being used for this year's Winter Games was an ice rink that's been restored from the last Olympics that they had about 50 years ago. And it's still the same bleacher seats that they use, these wooden bleacher seats in the rink. But they've like built up around it. So now it's inside enclosed, there's glass, and you can still see all the mountains in the back. And I thought that was really neat because it pays homage to like the fact that we have had games in this area before, but also, you know, what a cool little unique piece of history that's tied into what is now, you know, a mega event for all those world athletes.
That is crazy to think about.
But to tie up this conversation with a little bow, this is something that we've discussed before on CW Awesome Morning, the warming Winter Olympics. And so just to kind of show you a graph here, which is a little, you know, scary to think about, the fact that the temperature out there in Italy has warmed significantly since 1956 when they last held the Olympics in that area. We have warmed over 6.5 degrees, Tommy, which doesn't sound like a lot maybe to, you know, like a normal person. But for us, when we're looking at average temperatures, that is a significant jump in the February temperature to go up 6.5 degrees.
Yeah, so weather is what we look at on a week-to-week basis, right? When we're 20 degrees above normal today, climate, like what Kristen said, that's prolonged 6 degrees. So you can imagine the impacts. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you stretch that over time, look at the little bar chart. See how it's going up on that y-axis? So just in the recent decades, we've seen some big changes here. And in a place like Italy, I think you mentioned this too, around 7:30 on CW, is the glaciers that were once a lot more visible aren't as visible now. So that's just from the eyesight, the eye test theory, you know, how does it look different since the 50s? That's a big obvious change.
Yeah, the 1950s, as mentioned, the last time that Cortina held the Olympics, but not only the change, the 6.5 degree change, but look at that axis here. On the left there, the temperatures, the average February temperature is getting closer and closer to freezing. Obviously, that's not great when you need temperatures below freezing to keep that ice and snow in pristine condition. So not only are we warming substantially, we're getting closer to a threshold where it's going to be harder and harder to keep snow on the ground and to keep ice in condition there for these athletes. And again, this is specific to Italy, but looking forward in a warming climate, in general, there will be fewer host cities available. This data coming from our partners at Climate Central, looking at the Winter Olympics in the darker purple there, and the Winter Paralympics. Keep in mind, Paralympics 2 weeks after the start of the Olympics. So sometimes they even get nudged into the month of March. Currently, there's, you know, about probably 86, I believe they said, available locations that could host the Winter Olympics now. That falls to about 50 locations able to put on the Winter Olympics in a way that they could do it where these competitions, one, can be held, and two, you're not putting those athletes in danger. And then the Paralympics even more impacted because of that 2-week shift and a little bit further into March. I mean, this is concerning, Tommy, because you think about what a world would be like without the Olympics, or a world where you're kind of bouncing back and forth between maybe 3 to 4 locations, you know, every year, which I think would lose a little bit of the fun.
And also the use more of that artificial snow, which isn't too much of a change, but I think those athletes, they want the real elements, you know. There's got to be a little bit of some sort of texture when there's a different type for the skiers or snowboarders out there versus the actual fluff. And, you know, depending on the temperature and snow ratios, you get a little fluffy versus packed snow. It all depends on the climate. So very important. And if you make the artificial snow, if it's warmer, it turns to that cement sludge, and nobody wants to be skiing on that. Yeah,
for sure. And you know, it's such a fine line, because I would think with the snowboarders, you know, there were, or even skiers doing the moguls and stuff, you want that nice powdery snow. But I think even this week they've actually delayed one of the competitions because it was snowing so hard you couldn't see. The visibility was so low that we're like, we couldn't even do the competition because there's no way the cameras would be able to, you know, get these skiers and these boarders in a way that they can figure out it's a fair competition. So there's so much that goes into it. It's nice to not be in charge and just look from afar and know that it all works the way it works. But there is going to be a fine line between, is the Mother Nature going to cooperate enough to where 50, 100 years from now, we're still going to be able to look at the Winter Games as we know them now.
Definitely. Great points there, and good graph, good visuals too. It's nice to see that change over time.
Climate Central really doing the Lord's work, giving us these graphics to show, because it is one thing, you know, to look at Austin and Central Texas, but obviously my expertise in Italian weather is maybe not quite as it should be.
Italian food, that's my expertise.
Exactly,
So
yeah,
that's where
we
we're
want to
gonna
talk about
limit it.
pasta. Let's go. But Esme, yeah, that was kind of the conversation we've been having over the past few weeks about how sustainability is becoming a priority at the Olympic Winter Games and the Olympic Summer Games. But in a changing climate, you know, with greenhouse gas emissions keeping that blanket around the earth and these temperatures getting warmer and warmer on average, it's getting harder and harder, specifically for the Winter Games, to be, you know, held in some cities that are impacted more than others.
I really enjoyed this conversation and sitting back and listening to you all talk about how much of an impact weather really has on the Olympics. We don't really think about that, but when you have something like skiing and the visibility is not great, then obviously you can't have an Olympic game run. So it's cool to hear this. And we also have the article on our website, KXAN.com, and you can read on all of the different statistics that Kristen and Tommy shared, as well as some links. What is this link to?
That goes back to the 1956, the last time that
wow.
Cortina, Italy held the games there. So some facts and tips about what they did.
So if you're interested in reading how weather impacts the Olympics, we have the article for you. You can find it on our homepage, KXAN.com. Kristen and Tommy, thanks so much for joining me here on KXAN Plus, and we'll see you soon.
Sounds good. See you next week.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.